How's it, everyone? Just testing the sound. I hope you can hear me. Just add comments and ask questions. And if anyone, how's it, Bushle? If anyone wants to join in the conversation, just prompt me to put you on. Wow, I've already got one person that wants to be in. Let me just say a couple of things before I put the first person on the video. Shawshank, I can see you, and anyone else. The only rule is going to be try not to hog the floor. Maybe about 5 minutes per person if you want to engage me on anything. So, a few thoughts from me, right? I want us to have a conversation about ANELE and AKA the articles that surfaced today. The photos, I'm looking at some of it here as well. The article in Sunday World, News 24, and then of course there's a couple of videos doing the rounds as well. Usually when I engage you on social and political issues or deeply personal ethical issues that we have to tackle in life, I like to have my thoughts sorted out before I hit the live broadcast button. That's true for TV, radio, and also for Instagram. But I must say on this occasion, I don't have my ducks in a row because I've got way too many thoughts that come up for me. So this is going to be my most unstructured conversation, and you're going to get it as raw as possible. And that means that I'm not sure what direction we're going to go in. I'm not here to persuade you. I'm not here to morally judge anyone. And I don't have a neat argument in my back pocket or 10 that I want to come and give to you. I do want to raise a couple of issues, and I'll just leave it there. And then I want you to comment, and I want you to engage back. And equally, if you've got questions for me or the issues you want to raise, then I'm more than happy for us to do so. The first disturbing thing for me is, and I'm looking at one of the photos here, is the photo of AKA breaking down the door of his apartment. And it's not clear, obviously, what exactly his state of mind is entirely, although it's intrinsically violent. So whatever it is, it's not a particularly productive state of mind that he must be in when this happened. Whether he was under heavy drugs and what drugs or alcohol, at least anything else, I'm not sure. I can't tell that just from the stills, but the scene is disturbing. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the Oscar Pistorius analogy. And it's a scary one to pull out. I don't do so easily, but that for me is the first thing that comes to mind. And I don't think speculating about their relationship, what actually happened when she died, is helpful because we weren't there. We don't know the true facts. And I'm not into that kind of journalism, right? That's not what I'm about. I think the first reason why the story is not leaving me alone as Eusebius is because I actually want to have a conversation about me and about you and not so much about AKA. But I think the AKA story gives us an opportunity to talk about things which, as men in particular, we don't talk about sufficiently often. And I think the one thing, when I look at the video and I look at the photos of him breaking down the door, going through the door into the room where she was hiding, it seems, is that what comes up for me is my own capacity for violence. You know, we have this idea that men who commit violent acts are exceptional, and you and I can talk about those men calmly when something surfaces on social media. But the truth of the matter is that because of the unhealthy masculinities in society that exist, that all of us are either on the spectrum of violent as men, or alternatively, we have the capacity to be violent. And the first thing that scares me when I look at this, when I read the story and I look at the photos, is that it makes me think, could I be AKA? Could I have been AKA? Have I already been AKA? If you were to interview 10 people that I've dated over the course of my dating life, what did they say about the kind of partner that I was? Was I violent? And violence comes in many different forms. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to include bashing down a door. It can be emotional violence. It can be all sorts of ways in which you can be violent towards a partner without necessarily leaving physical evidence. Psychological violence can be massive, for example. And so the AKA story for me, when I look at how it plays out on Twitter, I see a bunch of us, majority of us on Twitter, not self-examining, but rather talking about the story as if the story is one that happens rarely in South Africa, and we're all sitting with popcorn and we're having a nice chat on the couch about what we think about the characters in this particular drama. And I think that's something else that disturbs me about the story. This is not some soapy that we watch playing out where I'm a celeb have exceptional lives. It's actually a very typical South African problem that relationships can be extremely violent, and that all of us as men in particular have the capacity to be violent. And I think that's one reason why this story is so disturbing for me, is because it kind of makes me just, do a double take and to keep it real with myself, that AKA is in the news today, but you could be in the news tomorrow. I can be in the news, and many of us who are not of interest to a entertainment journalist because maybe we're not famous enough, we are AKA on a daily basis, but we just will never land on the front page of the Sunday World if you're not sufficiently interesting in terms of being able to guarantee that there will be sales. And so I wonder how many men who have tuned in now. I mean, I've got at least 250 people watching this being live streamed, and a bunch of you will be men like myself. I wonder, here's my first question to you, and then I'll open it for one-on-one and one-on-two engagement. How many men recognize that you are also an AKA? How many of us recognize that there's a spectrum of violence, and you may not necessarily bash the door, but there are other ways in which we are toxic? Because if you are a boy or a man in a deeply, deeply, deeply patriarchal society, you are not immune to the different symptoms of unhealthy masculinities that exist out there. And I think that's something that we need to own up to, quite frankly. Okay, so what do you think? What are the issues you want to discuss around this? I've got many other issues I want to, to talk about. And if you want to come into the live room with me, give an opinion, agree, disagree on anything that I've said, feel free to do so. I see a couple of requests. I'm going to just keep it to about 5 minutes because many people want to say something. And let's have an honest conversation. My most important request is that we shouldn't dramatize what's happened here just because there's something about the lives of celebrities that make it easy to cheapen what are some really complicated questions that we need to talk about as a society. And I just think that what we're seeing playing out here is a phenomenon that unfortunately is all too familiar to many of us. Okay, I think there's someone who is... Okay, someone wanted to come in, but I can't hear them, so I'll give a second person a chance. Just show me if you are interested in joining, just indicate and I'll let you in. Would you like to touch on the text between AKA and her dad? I do want to touch on that, okay? So that's a question from one of you. I would like to see more of those texts before I can have a definitive view about the dad. But the one thing that's clear to me, and I say this with so much circumspection because there are details here that clearly are not available to any of us, is that I find it a little bit strange that the dad could have been so definitive about there not being a possibility of suicidality. Because if the clips that surface today is anything to go by, on the face of it, it is pretty clear that whether clinically or episodically fueled by drugs, alcohol or hard drugs, that from a mental health point of view, I look at some of these clips, both the ones about ANELE and featuring her and AKA, and I'm no shrink, I'm not a psychologist, but I look at those clips, I listen to the audio, the messaging, and I think to myself, all of us know the story of parents who wish the best for us. And we live in a country in which there's deep denial about a scourge of mental health challenges. And I am not yet convinced, I don't know about you, that one can so easily rule out the fact that this is also a story about mental health, and the mental health issues are being swept under the rug, partly because, especially as Black people, we don't like talking about ways in which we are broken or fractured when it comes to mental health in particular. And if you have mental health challenges and you are inside a toxic relationship, that relationship can be a trigger. It can exacerbate an underlying condition that you might already have. And if you and your partner are both toxic and your relationship is toxic, then of course any underlying conditions that you may or may not have could be triggered and could be fueled and worsened by the quality of the relationship that you are in. So I don't even know some of these people involved in the story, which is why I'm hesitating to be so definitive. But to answer your question, I do find the categorical ruling out of what the true cause might have been to be a little bit hasty. And I suspect that part of it is that we don't want to go there as family. We absolutely don't want to go there as family to consider the possibility that maybe all along someone was battling all sorts of issues. I mean, I'll take myself as an example because I think it's really important that we destigmatize these things. Um, I was interviewed yesterday on Ekurhuleni FM, and one of the hosts said to me afterwards, "Oh my God, my mom absolutely loves you, Eusebius. She keeps on saying that you're like one of the most confident people in the country." And I said, "Well, thank you. Please tell your mom that that's so generous of her." But you don't have a clue what Eusebius go through. I mean, there's a journalist that I've known for a long time in South Africa, but we've only really started chatting in a sort of open way over the last couple of weeks. And on one occasion, I said to him, about something that I was scared of. And he was shocked that I could use the word scared, because in his mind, Eusebius is someone who never flinches. But actually, I've had panic attacks. I've had a psychologist who's absolutely brilliant that I've seen for the last 10 years. I remember when I had my first panic attack, which is a really, really horrible thing to go through clinically. When I was in Oxford, I remember Hugh Masekela playing in the local theatre. I was convinced that I was getting a heart attack and went up to the reception area, and they dispatched the emergency medical services. And when the paramedics arrived and they checked me out, they said, "Sorry, dude, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. The bad news is we think you probably had an anxiety attack and you need to get assistance for that. And that's not about a physician. That's maybe making sure that you actually go into therapy." The point of the story that I'm trying to make is you never know what goes on in people's lives. And when it comes to mental health in particular, it's an area that we just don't focus on sufficiently. And because we are all performative and we curate lives on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, when we step out of the door, you leave behind some of the things that trouble you late at night. And secretly, you could be going through a lot. I don't think that AKA is in a healthy state. I've only met the guy once before he was a big deal. But I mean, if he has got a best friend, I think he himself needs to sort himself out. It's very clear to me. And it's not a judgment. I think that many of us, most of us as men, all of us as men, that are affected in different ways by really toxic masculinities that are role model to us, that are instilled in us, and which we take as the template for what we need to live up to. So he himself, I think, needs to undergo a very important journey if he is to recover from what it is that he's been going through. And it's not a judgment. In fact, it's the main motivation for this conversation is to say, in many ways, as men, we're all AKA, either potentially or in reality, and we're on a spectrum. And I think it's important that we actually have that conversation. Okay, so many of you are requesting to speak. Let's have another go. Nkwane, let's see whether I can actually get you on. If I can get this technology to work, then we can stop my soliloquy and we can actually have one-on-one conversations. Okay. Hello.
Oh no.
How's it, dude? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can see you and I can hear you. I saw a
Okay.
prompt that you wanted to come on.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your first question. That question of whether do men realize or recognize that, they are part of the problem or, you know, and, the thing is, one thing I realized is, and I'm speaking from experience, I've been in such a relationship uh, that is like as toxic as that, I guess. But, images can only be telling to a certain extent, but you know, it's never one-sided, and you know, all I know is that some things are just, especially when emotions are at play. Like it's not black and white. You cannot just demonize one person and say, well, this person is the aggressor in the relationship, because you end up being, yes, a person can be an aggressor in a relationship, and you can find that another person is a victim, I guess. But when love, and all those type of emotions are at play, you would find that, the other party keeps on forgiving the other person, and the other person keeps on apologizing and committing the same mistakes. And whether there's outside intervention.
Okay, we've just lost you there, but while your connection is coming back, let me agree with you.
All I just wanted to say that,
Okay, we're losing you there a little bit. So let me say a couple of things. I am not interested in virtue signaling and suggesting that AKA was an aggressor.
oh, should I
I,
proceed?
I, hold on one second. Yeah, just listen to me a little bit. I think the line, your your connection is a bit poor, so we're going to speak past each other. So just give me a minute or two to articulate, and then I'll give you a chance to make a final comment. I don't think it's productive. And if you're not close to the situation, I don't think you have a factual basis, myself or you or anyone, for saying he is the aggressor, so and so is the physical, psychological, or moral, I don't know, cause of someone else's death. I'm not interested in the judgment call. I wanted to have this conversation because I wanted us to have a conversation about ourselves through Anele and AKA's relationship and the tentative fact that we know, mindful that there's a lot that we don't know. I don't think judging is going to get us anywhere. What I am suggesting is that, and I was saying to a mate of mine, to Oliver, one possibility, and it's so speculative, I'm loath to go there. So please be mindful that I'm being speculative. One possibility is that Anela maybe had mental health challenges before this relationship and entered the relationship where she was toxic, he was toxic. They in turn are toxic relationally, and that exacerbates the experience of feeling uncertain in the world, right? So that's one possibility. And that possibility, the question of blame is not interesting to me. It's rather recognizing that we live in a society in which certain patterns of behavior go untreated, unnoticed, and we don't have the tools with which to pull ourselves back from the brink or with which to talk to one another. That's for me is all that I'm saying. And if we take her out of the picture and we look at AKA just as a public figure and the patterns of relationship that he's been in, and again, I'm not judging, I'm describing here. He's I don't know, man. The guy does become too much of a common factor in so many relationships that go awry. And I think that's because, as men in general, and I include myself in that, we tend to be very toxic. I've been in many toxic relationships where I have been the aggressor. And I think it's important to recognize that. And that's why I'm saying, in a sense, when I look at this photo here of AKA bashing down the door, I don't know about you, I get scared when I see that photo because I think to myself, I could I do what AKA did? And the answer is yes, because the capacity for violence is intrinsic in any human being. We all have that capacity. And I think to myself, shit, I wonder what it will take in my case to act as violently as he does. And that scares me. I don't know how you feel.
Well, I just wanted to say, can we come to the conclusion that some things can only be resolved by experience? why am I saying this? I'm saying this because, as I was trying to say earlier, you know, sometimes even if people are still in a relationship where it's obvious that this party or this person is an aggressor and this person is a victim, but like I said, the love is at play, emotion is at play, and you cannot separate the two.
Okay. Oh, it's such a pity that we've lost you. But
Because yes, things
yeah,
can
there you
end
go.
up in a tragic way.
Mm,
Yes, things can end up in a tragic way, of course, but I've seen and I've been personally in a situation where I wouldn't be willing to listen to anyone because I was so deeply entrenched in my emotions that I couldn't be
absolutely.
rational in the situation,
Mm,
and as unfortunate it can be, like it's sad, and I'm acknowledging and recognizing how dangerous this this type of thinking may be, to say experience can be the only resolve. But I think that in some cases, um, some things we should just say, let it be a learning experience, because yeah, what more can people say?
No, I agree. I totally agree with you. The only thing I would add is let's have the learning experience and name what those learnings are so that we actually do the learning that you say that we should be doing. Otherwise, we're going to say it's a learning experience. We start tomorrow, Monday, with a clean sheet, but actually no learning happened because we didn't deal with the underlying issues. Um, the learning that needs to happen is that we need to habituate as boys and as men in particular. And I deliberately keep stressing the gender point because disproportionately it is us who are mostly violent. And I'm happy to have that as a debating point. We have to role model and practice different ways of being male in the world. That is the learning that needs to happen. We can't stop at the point where we say lessons must be learned, right? Because you can say lessons must be learned. Let's go to bed. It's now 11 o'clock. You wake up tomorrow. You pretend to be healthy again. Come Thursday, come Friday, then suddenly we are back to square one. So, I really think it's important that we are clear about that. Okay, let me read some of your comments. Kemi says, but her father categorically stated that this is a false narrative, so I don't understand why we are perpetuating it without all the facts. Look, I think you're right, but all I'm saying is it is also not obvious that her dad has the final facts available. I can tell you for free that my family doesn't know at least 70% of all the facts about my life. I live my life far away from the Eastern Cape where my family is. Okay? So my mom died with a particular narrative about her son. My dad has a narrative about his son. And there are many facts that they're not aware of. There are many things my friends know that they don't know about. So this idea that a dad has got the final, ultimate, and unchallengeable view of the full life of their child, I know it's a difficult thing to say, but unless your dad is your BFF, who himself is with you all the time, you can't just appeal to what a dad says categorically as the end of the conversation. Close mates, associates, colleagues, lovers, those are the people that actually spend time with you, probably have got a fuller picture of what's going on. Okay, here's another comment. Their energy must have fed off each other in the relationship. The lows maybe triggered each other, and I actually see it in relationship with people I know. That is such a profoundly important point, right? There is each of the two actors in a relationship, and then there is the relationship dynamic. And very often there's codependency that can happen. And we also have to recognize that. And you can talk about how two people become dependent on one another in unhealthy ways without blaming either party. And I think that's partly what it is that you are talking about there. Okay, Bushel says, why are we not having a broader discussion about toxic relationships? Bushel, why don't you just come on, man? I think that's a really cool point. Instead of just focusing on men. Look, that's true, and I'm happy to have that conversation as well. And I'm not suggesting that women can't be violent. Firstly, I'm not suggesting that every single man is a problem, but I think it's important to be honest about patterns, and we know what the patterns are in South Africa in particular, right? And in our country, it is particularly disproportionately us as men who tend to be violent. I mean, that's just a fact. And I don't know why that is a fact that anyone would find upsetting to acknowledge as a fact. That's just reality. Um, and the thing about talking about relationships rather than about men and about women or about individuals in the relationship is that although we can talk about toxic relationships, there's something safe about talking about relationships without talking about individual persons. Because you can also almost talk about the relationship as if it is a thing on its own that lives somehow independent of the people inside the relationship. But it's people who are in a relationship, and we have got to talk about the psychologies of the individuals who are in those relationships. Romantic relationship, relationships in the workplace, whatever they might be. They're real human beings there, and we need to talk about them. And what I'm suggesting is that this AKA story and ANELE story, when I look at it, there's a whole bunch of things for me that I see that are way too typical of way too many of us as boys and men in the country. I mean, the other conversation I wanted to spark, and then I'll let more of you in on the video after this is, I wonder whether we're prepared to have a conversation also about drugs. Um, Not every act and warning, I'm not implying anything about what the cause of death was in this case. But when it comes to suicidality, not every act of suicide or death by suicide necessarily involves mental health, by the way. Um, the majority of cases would be, but sometimes it can also be situational, right? That you do something as a result of the particular situation you find yourself in. We know, for example, there used to be this horror in the Eastern Cape where I come from, one of the breaches just outside PE, where every bloody single year, because of the way we overemphasized matric results, there would be some learners who didn't pass, who throw themselves off the bridge. Not necessarily enduring mental health issues up until that point, but the moment of deep disappointment of not seeing your name, the newspaper can lead to that. And I wonder whether we're prepared to talk about how stupid we can behave when we are drunk, how stupid we can behave if we are under the influence of harder drugs other than alcohol. So there are two categories that we need to separate here. There are underlying mental health issues that we don't speak about in society. And then there's the question of the trigger. If I know that I'm addicted to food, I need to sort out the addiction. But in the meantime, I need to make sure that I get rid of all the KFC in the house so that I'm not tempted. And drugs are a little bit the same. And I think the other opportunity we have with this story is to talk honestly about drugs, particularly among celebrities, but not only celebrities, but what drugs do to us in terms of completely undermining your ability to think reflectively in the moment and making a sober judgment call about what to do and what not to do. And I'm not saying this only because I quit alcohol, but it is interesting watching drunk people like I did the other night while you are sober, and then you recognize how much of your own critical faculties were completely, literally drunk and not in the room once you reach a certain state of drunkenness. Add to that other kinds of things. I've never taken cocaine. I've taken one or two other substances, and then honestly, you can be in a situation where you are no longer the person that you ordinarily would be making sober judgment calls. And I think that's the other thing about the story for me that's important. It's an opportunity for us to really talk about drugs, including drugs that are socially acceptable, like alcohol, and what alcohol abuse actually does. And also keeping it real that there are many people that need alcohol, or so they think, in order to be able to let loose, to have fun. And there's a kind of like social dependency on it in order to be able to have a good time that we need to talk about, that I think is actually also worth having. Okay, a number of you want to come on. Dr. Thompson, let's see whether I can actually get you to come on. And feel free to agree, disagree with me, type your comments. If you want to redirect the conversation, you're most welcome to do so as well. How's it?
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. Thank you very much for this very important conversation, which I just happened to bump into. I just wanted perhaps, before I just make a brief contribution, to just ask a question so that I'm not getting you wrong. So at the beginning of this conversation, you did highlight that we are all AKA. I just wondered maybe what you exactly mean by that before I have my intervention. The reason why I asked this question is because if I understood you correctly, first, you made a very important point that because you do not have all facts at hand, you don't want to be definitive about anything, and you're not casting judgment. But at the same time, I feel as if when you then use the phrase "we are all AKA," it appears in my mind that you are choosing not to cast judgment at the same time casting judgment. As to when you're saying we are all AKA, you're assuming a state of knowledge about the situation. I wanted to know if I'm getting that correctly. The reason why I'm a bit concerned about that is because if in the event that AKA is guilty of something, I'll be very uncomfortable for saying we are all AKA, especially if he's guilty of abuse. Because in my mind, that may have a negative impact as far as accountability is concerned, accountability of abuse is concerned. So I just wanted briefly to understand what you meant when you said like we are all AKA in this situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure about your last statement about accountability, but let's set that aside. All men are AKA in the sense that we all have the capacity to be violent. Whether that capacity gets activated or not depend on your ability to control your capacity and to not act on that capacity and to know what to do where there are situations where that capacity comes close to being triggered. So I don't think you can live in a society that is deeply patriarchal and misogynistic and not be affected by unhealthy masculinities. There isn't a single man in our country and in the world that is unaffected by the history of patriarchy. And in that sense, we are all AKA. And I don't retract that statement because I think it's a powerful challenge to us as individual men in this conversation to think about how patriarchy has affected each one of us in different ways. But as Professor Kopana Ratele says in his first book, there are many different kinds of masculinities that are all unhealthy, not just one kind of masculinity. AKA's specific toxic masculinity doesn't have to be mine before that statement is true. It doesn't have to be yours. It can play out very differently. For example, I'm gay, I'm not straight, but I can have unhealthy masculinities that I exhibit in my relationship with men that I date. I might not be sexually active and be asexual and also be AKA in the sense that I have violent masculinities that demonstrate itself in the way in which I speak to people at work, for example. So I meant the statement in the broadest possible sense. I wasn't talking about this particular issue. And let me just say this, and then I'll pause to hear what your actual thoughts are beyond me clarifying my view. I think AKA has got a problem regardless of ANELE. If ANELE never existed on planet Earth, AKA has got a violence problem. I mean, there's nothing healthy about the capacity that is activated that makes you break down a door in a violent rage. Even if it was his favorite teddy bear that was locked behind the door and that's how he acted. He has got a health problem. The nature of it we can talk about. When I say that AK has got a problem, I don't mean that he caused her death. I can't make that claim. But what I can tell you is that even if she never existed in our lifetime, and all we have is this video of this guy bashing down the door as a single man living as a hermit, I would still say he's got violent masculinity as a hermit living on his own.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I really appreciate it. The reason why I actually thought it is because when I first heard you saying that, I feared specifically a potential misinterpretation of that statement being interpreted positively or as a statement of sympathy when we say we are all AKA. So I do not dispute, for example, when you're talking about that, the general of us men, we have a problem. Most of us may be abusive. It's an issue that needs to be dealt with. So the reason why I sought clarification, I just wanted, when I linked it to the issue of accountability, I just wanted to be sure that when we're saying we are all AKA, we are not trying to say, even if you would be in the wrong, we are drawing sympathy, that we are trying to normalize a certain behavior that we may act in a certain way because...
Oh, no. Hold on one second. I thought, no. It's an important intervention. No, I'm saying the opposite. If you,
thank you.
I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying AKA is problematic, and we're all problematic. The only question is, what is the nature of your problematic behavior?
Exactly. That's the point which I needed clarification. In that case, we are in agreement. So what I was just worried about was to say, in the event that is in the wrong, if we're saying we're all AK, we behave badly, I was worried more about normalization of bad behavior.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
So in this regard, all the other important points which you talk about, this case pointing to abuse, issues of suicide, mental health issues, I totally agree with you. I just got worried when I started seeing some hashtags saying we are all AK. I thought, what are we saying here? So
on Twitter?
Right here on your live.
Yeah, but I mean that's fine. Look, there's the language is important, right?
Yeah.
But equally, that's why we have conversation. If someone misunderstands, then you put up your hand and you ask for clarification. What we can't do is to be scared of having tough, blunt conversations because one person is going to run with something. Like, if they do, we'll just point out that they're being wrong about it. I insist. AK has got a problem. All men have a problem. And the only question is, where on the scale or on the spectrum are you in terms of problematic masculinity, and how does it manifest in you in your particular relationships with people? And it can come out, as you know, in many different ways. You can be abusive verbally, you can be abusive emotionally, psychologically, you can be physically abusive, and you can do it in a range of kinds of ways. And when someone says, this is what I thought you were getting at, but I think we're actually on the same page. I thought that you were wanting clarity because you were offended at the idea that men as a category are being indicted.
No. So actually, I've had this debate about when all men are trash, and why I thought like
exactly 100%.
So when yeah, all AK, because I've been reading people sympathizing to say, let's not judge, let's go into. So when we say
I saw that too.
I needed intervention about accountability. In that regard, I will not waste more time. I'll give other people a chance. Thank you.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. So thanks, dude. I appreciate that intervention. Thanks for it. Okay, if you want to join in, just knock and I will open. In the meantime, let me read some of your comments. Listen, the worst way in which you can get me to respond to you is by being rude just because I don't share your worldview. So, Chiati, I won't block you because that will make you a martyr. But asking a question like, where on the fucking scale are you? You're not going to get a response to that. It's completely unhelpful. Be civilized and have a proper conversation with me. If you're not capable, go and find friends where you can shout at each other and perform your hypermasculinity in a different echo chamber where your hypermasculinity can be affirmed. This is a conversation that's tough and productive and civilized. And if you're not capable or willing, then get out of it. Okay, here's another comment. Someone says, what I'm getting from this is that men find it very difficult to look inwards and take accountability for their BS. We do. We absolutely do. We prop each other up. We get touched on our studios very quickly. We don't like generalizations, even when the generalizations are anchored in patterns of experience. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that we are raised to be defensive in that kind of way. And that's why this kind of conversation really isn't an easy one for many men to be part of. Here's another question. Do you think working in media that the news headlines are changing the narrative by portraying in words. I agree with what you're saying. I just want to know. I I have to confess, please don't tell them because I bump into these people all the time. When it comes to musicians, actors, even in my area of the media, I'm not interested in their personal lives, so I don't consume a lot of entertainment journalism. So I can't really to be fair on the editors and the journalists in this part of the media. I can't really comment on how they typically go about writing the headlines and covering the story. I bought the Sunday World today because for some reason this story is just, and maybe it's because I've met AKA once, I don't know. Sometimes there's a randomness about why a particular story grabs you. How has the media covered this? I don't know, but the fact that it's in Sunday World is, over the years, it's in some ways it's been a very good paper, especially their political coverage. Because I bought it, I didn't just stop at one article. So I take the newspaper very seriously. They've got an excellent editor that's currently back there who was there before. And my worry was that if the story is in the Sunday World, that we won't have the kind of serious conversation that I'm trying to have right now, because the Sunday World, you probably, in the first instance, associated with entertainment journalism. And for me, this is not a story that is about entertainment. I think this is a hell of a serious story. I'm not in a mood to crack jokes. I'm not coming onto the platform to even attempt to be my usual dry, witty self or attempting to be witty. I think this is a really serious, serious story. And the fact that it's written by an entertainment journalist is neither here nor there. Tato says, people, men, love focusing on the minutiae so that they can avoid the statement in its fullness. Absolutely. Although, to be fair to Dr. Thompson, I think him and I were on the same page. He wanted to make sure that I'm not saying the opposite of what he had in mind. So he did focus on the minutiae, but I actually appreciated it. I think in terms of the substance, we were actually on the same page. But you're right, people like to deflect in the same way in which you will find many a white person deflecting when we talk about whiteness and we talk about anti-black racism and we talk about white privilege. They always want to say, but I grew up poor. I'm the one who had to work very hard to get to where I am now, and completely missed the point about how patterns of ownership work, about how it is a black person that's more likely to be unemployed than their white child. Because the stats tell us a different story. I'm more likely to be followed around by a security guard in a store than a white person who is my doppelganger, but is racialized differently to me and is phenotypically white. And so this obsession with, but I'm not part of the generalization, so please don't put it as generalization. It is utterly unhelpful. We've got to be honest about the patterns in society. And as a group, us men have got a group level set of problems that we need to actually talk about seriously. And if we first want to start off the conversation with a list of exceptional men, then you're already having the wrong conversation as far as I'm concerned. Okay, let's see, bring someone else on. Hello.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm in the dark. People are sleeping, but I would love to add.
It's okay, we can hear what you have to say. Why are you hiding in the dark?
I'm sleeping. There's kids here. I don't want to switch on the light.
Oh, okay. I'll try not to be too loud.
Yeah, I don't want to be too loud. No, I'm just reading the comments on your timeline, Eusebius, and I feel like in South Africa, we have a long way to go because a lot of these men don't even understand what we mean by toxic masculinity. And they are also focused on we are not all the same. And I want to ask the men who are saying they are good men and they don't do bad. I want to ask them, how does that help the issue that we have a high GBV rate? How does the fact that you are a good guy assist, or you could perceive yourself as a good guy, end gender-based violence? Because at the end of the day, it's still high. We are still getting raped. We are still getting killed. And you being a good guy doesn't solve that, doesn't end that. So you keep telling us that you're not trash, you're not part of that. How does that assist? I just want to know that.
Your question is beautiful and important. It's right up there with if a white person says to me, okay, I'm a good ally, Eusebius. Okay, I've put Mavis's child through school, and not a bad school. I made sure that Mavis's child went to Rodin with Mandy, my daughter. How dare you say all white people? I'm sorry, but a white person who says that is not a bloody ally. They completely do not yet get how whiteness works, how white privilege works, and they don't understand the story that can be told of situational luck that enabled them to be able to send Mavis's kid to Rodin with their own child. And it's the same with men. Any guy who thinks that he doesn't have a problem and gets offended and can only be an ally in the fight for a gender equal society after we've given them a badge for never having raised their finger, actually that's a very toxic attitude.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's ironically enough, it's a performance of hypermasculinity.
Exactly. And I think for me, instead of asking yourself, instead of saying I'm not a bad guy or I don't do this, what you should ask yourself is, in what ways do I contribute? For instance, I know a friend who used to say to me, I'm not a rapist. But one of these days we were chatting and he was referring to women as stalker, which basically means stock. Like we are things in a marketplace. We are things to be used and we are sexual things. And I was like, so you not a bad guy, you don't rape, but you call women stalker. You are perpetuating rape culture. You are part of the problem. Just because you don't
Absolutely.
physically rape or beat, but there are many ways in which you are toxic. And that's what toxic masculinity is. The idea that, we hunt for women. They don't come to us. There's just so many examples I can give, but that's just what I wanted to contribute. Thank you for this chat.
Thank you so much. Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Cheers. And that's Mommy Feminist. What a beautiful contribution there. Okay, a couple of you want to come on, please. If you do, just say so, and I will let you come on. Yeah, Elizabeth says very toxic. Absolutely. Thanks, Norma. Thank you. Absolutely. Okay, let's see who's coming on next. Hello. Oh, I think your line is louding. How's it? Daba says, where?
Oh, hello. Hi, EUSEBIUS. Sorry.
How are you?
So the phone is in my pocket. I didn't realize you were talking to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I saw you
so
prompting earlier. I didn't have a chance. The line is a bit unclear, but let me shut up and see whether I can hear you.
There's a lot of very interesting things you said. And it's very difficult to focus on one area of the conversation. It's a very important and broad conversation. But I think one of the places where we need to start is people get very defensive about this concept of mental issues. I think people imagine mental issues to be some extreme, schizophrenia or depression, when mental issues have a very vast range, as with everything else. We all have mental issues to some degree, if you actually think about it. And I think if we thought about it that way, we wouldn't have to get so defensive and trying to defend her honor and defend her father. And someone who stands on the top of the hill and tries to jump is suffering from some form of heightened mental issue. That's the bottom line. No one is saying that she's crazy or so on and so forth. And that's just one part that I personally am trying to focus on more these days, is that we imagine mental issues as something a lot more sinister. And so you can't even get help until things are really bad. And that was the comment that I sent earlier, is that even when it's beyond the mental issues, why is there no space between a healthy relationship and so toxic that someone dies? We had the radio interview. I don't want to name names, but we had the radio interview last year where a musician cried, and she's getting married now. And if something happens to her, we can't say that there were no signs. We're all watching this thing unfold on our TV screens. We're seeing evidence every day. But until she dies, we can't do anything. We don't have the tools or the space to intervene. Like, what is missing there?
I agree with you. We've often had interesting debates, but on this one, I agree with you completely. I think you've nailed it. I saw someone on the comment section here saying earlier, but why are we pushing the mental health issue? And I keep saying, firstly, we don't know the true facts, so I'm not pushing a mental health issue about this case. But I am saying because we can, let's talk about mental health just as a topic on its own. And I think the reason why the person was saying that, to underscore your point, why are we pushing it? Well, if there was a physical ailment, would you also say, why are you pushing it? You wouldn't, but that's because we've normalized talking about things that physically make us unwell. But when it comes to the spectrum of mental health issues, we haven't normalized public conversation about it. Not even domestically have we normalized such conversation. And so to even raise the phrase mental health, someone thinks that we are saying something absolutely terrible about another human being. I'm a highly functional person. I have done a lot. I've written 3 books. I'm proud of my career. I've got 3 degrees, 1 that I didn't finish. There's a lot that I've done in life, but I've also had mental health challenges. I thought I was going to die before I'm 40. It took my psychologist a lot of work in my 30s to get me to stop believing that I'm going to die before I'm 40. When I came back from England, I used to still have panic attacks, and I had to get that sorted out so that it doesn't cripple my performance in the world. You know what I mean? There's nothing that is taken away from who I am as Eusebius to say that for the last 10 years, I've intermittently seen a really good guy, John, who helps me with my mental health. Now, the wrong response to what I'm saying on Instagram is to rush to work tomorrow and say, oh my God, did you hear Eusebius last night on Instagram? He said that he had panic attacks and he has seen a guy for 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, no one gossips about me having a personal trainer to help me lose weight and to improve my strength from a physical point of view. In fact, I get encouragement that I have a personal trainer and a boxing trainer. But as soon as I should say, not even to react to a problem, but as part of preventative mental health, I'm seeing a coach, then people will go, oh my God, he's a little bit loony. And it's nonsense. So we've got to destigmatize that conversation.
No, 100%. And then, I mean, I'd like to listen on the radio because I am in the middle of the road. So I want to put you back in my pocket. But about that space to intervene, what happens? Why is there that big, huge gap between a healthy relationship and so toxic that someone dies? Like, what is missing there? Like, I really don't get that. What's in there?
Yeah, that's a deep question. Let's see what others have to say. It's good seeing you. Some really, really good questions. And I don't have answers. I'm not a guru. I'm just telling you my viewpoints and sharing with you my own experiences, including the fact that, you know, I really have a very good guy that I see periodically. Michael, this is such a profound question. The double lives men live, says Michael, showing love to their mothers, but being violent to the mother of their children. Yep, absolutely. Lulu, let's see whether we can get you on. Hello, Lulu.
Hi, can you see me?
I can. How are you?
Okay, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing? Thank you for this conversation, by the way.
No, it's only a pleasure. It's important conversations. Don't tell me you go to bed looking as fresh as you are looking.
I really, really do. Anyway, so my I'm quite hesitant to share my contribution. I mean, I don't know, like, the age range or age groups of the people who are your main audience. I'm just a student, you know, I'm a child, so I'm hesitant. But also, the last person who joined you, their last comment really touched me. So the difference between a really healthy relationship and the point at which one partner is killing the other. And honestly, I think it goes back to something he said earlier on, which is to say that you see the red flags early. And the red flags might not be as frightening as someone throwing a phone against the wall. Yeah. It can be something as subtle or something seemingly inconsequential, like a comment, like calling women Storo. And I think the problem is that, well, something I have experienced, especially in my relationships, or like with my friends, for example, right? I would say, I mean, I'm at GCT. The men in my circle are people who are relatively aware of what's going on in the world, you know, politically aware, politically correct in their speech, you know. But I've had certain instances where if I address something that could potentially lead to them behaving in a very dangerous manner, it's met with a lot of defensiveness, right? And half the time when I'm trying to address this problem, it's not necessarily to accuse them of anything. It's not necessarily to say that they are bound to be aggressive or violent in the future, but just trying to show how they contribute to that culture, right? And this reminds me of, you know how that pyramid of needs, of human needs? Yes. So I saw a picture showing how seemingly inconsequential acts and things that we say ultimately lead to someone dying at the hands of a man. You know, you might not have directly contributed to it, but locker room talk, dismissing women when they talk, sort of, you know, wanting to quickly and defensively sort of try to redirect the conversation when I am confronting you about something you said that's made me feel unsafe, you know. I think those are the red flags. I think those are what is between a very healthy relationship and one that is aggressive in a very outright manner that everyone can see. So
Lulu,
yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you've captured better what I was getting at earlier with Dr. Thompson, who was useful in pressing me to clarify so I'm not misunderstood. When I say we're all AKA and there's a spectrum of behaviors that are wrong, that's exactly what you've just identified. Whether it is, as someone is rightly saying, another example of what you're talking about, that is a small but a red flag, nevertheless, silent treatment.
Yeah.
So the person who gives you the silent treatment isn't bashing down the door. And so they might say, how dare you say we are all AKA? I've never beaten you. But the silent treatment is a form of trauma that she's experiencing in you not doing anything physical. But the not doing anything is a problem. And that exactly goes to the heart of what you're saying. And then there's gaslighting.
Yes.
As soon as you point out, dude, that comment was a little bit off about women.
Yeah.
And then I turn on you and suddenly accuse you of lacking a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And then you go to bed.
Gaslighting is the worst.
Your final thought
it's the worst,
is, was I overreacting?
Yeah, it's the worst, especially if you don't have the vocabulary or just the words to articulate why the comment or the action was wrong. It's really, really disempowering, if that's a word, I'm not sure, but it really feels 100%. You helpless in the moment. It helps it and I think really the point of my contribution is for everyone, men, women, non-binary, like everyone, to realize the potential of that we could all be aggressive, that we could all harm someone. And not to say that it's only men who are capable of harming people or being violent, but unfortunately, the likelihood is that the people who are likely to be physically violent towards a woman, unfortunately, is likely to be a man. So, of course, if I'm going to warn people about them potentially being violent one day, I'm obviously going to focus my energies more on the men around me. But yeah, I think this is something that's, like the previous person said, there are many aspects to this conversation. And in talking about the many different aspects to this conversation, I think it's very important that we don't put down whatever someone else is highlighting in favor for whatever it is that we think we should be prioritizing. For example, I really believe in the power of confronting people about their actions and their words, whereas my brother, who I talk to a lot, would say the priority should be on raising young boys in a way that encourages them to actually talk about these things, you know? So, yeah, there are many aspects to this very, very horrible issue. And we are all trying to address it as best as we can, I think. I'd like to hope. But yeah, a lot of work needs to be done. And unfortunately, sadly, it falls mostly on the people who are under attack.
No, I agree with you. And thanks for your beautiful contribution. I do want to challenge as well. Like you, it depends on what I had for breakfast. You know, you can't be in confrontation mode every moment of the day, because if you see injustice everywhere, you're going to be drained physically and emotionally and not do anything for yourself, right? But like you, I'm also generally a challenger. I think people know me as that. And my challenge is, if there's nothing else that we take away from this conversation, and you don't have to take away if you disagree with it, is I do think a bigger part of the solution space must be owned by men. It is weird how with all forms of oppression in the world, it is the victims and survivors who are the ones doing the workshopping of how to solve the problem. And that can't be. You know what I mean? And that's why I said on Twitter and Facebook, I'd love men to be here in particular, because women are fluent in thinking through this stuff. And it's nonsense when it's our agency that is responsible for the problem by and large.
That's very true. It's incredibly unfair. But, you know, many of us feel as though we have the responsibility to be at the forefront, because at the end of the day, this is something that affects us too. But yeah, definitely. Before I leave, because I have school to do, something that, and I think it's definitely because of his bias towards however men may view this issue. Something my brother says when we talk about this a lot is, okay, my disclaimer is that I feel as though respectability politics and you telling me to calm down and speak in a very respectable manner is a form of gaslighting. But something on Twitter really forced me to perhaps reconsider how much of an impact my approach makes when I am challenging someone on their views. That's something I'm still struggling with right now, but I'm wondering how that changes the conversation. And not to say that as women, if you're going to talk about this to a man, that you need to speak in a certain way, you know, sound nice and all, but I'm just wondering, or perhaps it's a challenge for myself rather, to be more approachable, you know, to try and go at it with an open mind, supposedly. That's just something.
Before you go, I went through this on a weekly, daily basis on my radio show. And a lot of the times it's a dramatic conversation, but sometimes it's also creatively interesting and fun. If we have a problem, I know the problem is real, like racism. What will I do if a racist comes onto my open line or comes onto our Instagram live conversation? Do I teach them and have a teaching moment? Or do I judge them because they've just said something that is really off? Or do I just shut them down because I am a better debater or more fluent in their own language? And where I'm at personally is, actually, we don't even need to be consistent. If you wake up tomorrow and you want to be nice to your brother's friends and speak in a nice tone and go into workshopping mode where you are cis-dolly, you can do that. But if you wake up tomorrow and you decide, you know what, fuck it. I'm actually tired of being expected to be the teacher guarding my tone so that someone can really get my message. Because Eusebius told me the message is more likely to land if I say it softly rather than being angry. No, like you shouldn't. So I really think that the violence of misogyny, and by analogy of racism, is so unacceptable and so much the bigger issue in the room that you should give yourself permission to not even be consistent on how you deal with it. The people who should be going to bed, the people who should be doing homework about communication are the perpetrators. Just think about how wrong this burden is located. You and I, Black people, have to think for hours what are the best ways to have a conversation with Steve Hofmeyer. The guy is gone. He's not even thinking about it.
Yeah. Incredibly unfair, but hopefully our work makes a difference, you know?
Yeah. And it will. Trust
Thank
me.
you so much.
They're listening in on the conversation silently.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to be consistent. Many more of you want to come in. I'm only going to take one more person, and then we'll wrap it there for tonight. We can have the conversation again in the week. Okay, let's see if Ivan is still there, who wanted to say something. My apologies that I can't get everyone in, or maybe we can get two people in at the same time. And another 5 minutes, and then we leave it there for today. Bushle, your comments are so amazing. I wish I could just broadcast them to everyone. Hello.
Hi, Eusebius. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I nearly jumped when I saw that you wanted me to join your live video. I was like, yo, oh my goodness, what have I done? I wanted to share, I guess, talk to a group of people, especially those who are in corporate South Africa. Because when you start talking about mental health, you normally think about issues within a relationship and not necessarily within a work environment.
Yes.
I also want to talk to females who might start feeling like because of their work situation, they're not good enough, and that they feel like they need to work twice as hard because of the toxic environment that they're in. Sometimes you find that violence is not necessarily fists and knives and guns out. Sometimes it's emotional, where you work in an environment that is toxic to a point where you have to apologize in terms of what you say, how you say it, how you present yourself. And in some instances, you have to tone down your character. When you are vocal about certain things, when you're vocal about your values, you are deemed as someone who's very aggressive, and especially when it comes to females. And in corporate South Africa, when it comes to Black females.
I think that's true. 100%. I've seen it. When I'm aggressive, I'm called passionate. When you're aggressive, you are losing control. You are emotional.
Yes, and in some instances, you find that no matter how brilliant your ideas are, you are ignored. In some instances, you find that it's just ignorance and people don't take you seriously. I'll give you a simple example. So I'm from Limpopo. I'm from a small town called Malamlele. I'm a PhD candidate, very confident, very smart. But somewhere along the lines, I came across a very toxic environment where I got to a point where I stopped believing in myself, you know? I started thinking that I wasn't good enough to be pursuing a PhD at one of the leading institutions in South Africa, you know? I crashed. I had to go through a journey of therapy where you have to then talk to someone who then plays back the environment that you're in and in a way starts showing you that actually you're not losing your mind, you know? So I want to speak to those types of people who are in toxic work environments where violence is not where you find that people are fighting against you physically, but it's more of an emotional battle, and you are sitting at home and wondering if you should go to work tomorrow because you don't understand what's happening to you. And I do also want to put an emphasis on the importance of therapy, because especially as Black people, we think that therapy is not something that you need to consider. Therapy is usually for our white counterparts where they have to go and talk to someone. You have to find someone outside of your networks, outside of people that you talk to on a daily basis, to be a sounding board. And you're not
Absolutely.
crazy. I've had to go
Absolutely.
through that. There's nothing wrong with antidepressants, and especially when your body and your emotional being starts telling you that whatever you're going through is not right. It is not right. It's not right.
And sometimes, as you know, and I'm so glad we have pivoted the conversation away from AKA and ANELE to this conversational theme. You got to find the right doctors and the right therapists, and once you do, defer to their experience and to their professional judgment.
Yes.
And you might find that different interventions for different individuals. But those of us who've had experience, and maybe we should do an Instagram live just on this topic at some point in the next week or two, and explain to people who are scared of therapy what the process involves, what the experiences are. Some of it is fun and funny and weird and interesting, you know. And one of them is that if you need, for example, antidepressants, or if you need, I don't know, 2 milligrams of Dormanoct, you can't do the mental health work if your body is just bruised and
You
battered.
can't. You can't.
So sometimes your body needs a break. You need a good night's rest to be able to work tomorrow, let alone to go to your counselor at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And all of those conversations between your GP or your physician and your therapist, it's all part of a holistic approach to your well-being. And so meanwhile, they think, oh, she's doing a PhD, Eusebius is confident, but
Exactly.
it's confidence on the back of an army of health workers helping you to thrive, because existence is hard. It's actually very hard to be
It's
alive.
difficult. It's difficult. And I guess you're spot on in terms of the persona that people see when they look at you. They're like, but how can you be depressed? Like, how can you be so broken and yet you have a bubbly personality? How can you
Yeah.
be sad? You know, I got to a point
Yes.
where my sisters would look at me and cry because they just didn't understand how our sister, who's very strong, is down and out. And I always say, you can't be great and strive for more when you're empty and broken. And sometimes
Absolutely.
it's not a toxic relationship between a man and woman within a romantic or a marriage setting. Sometimes it's the environment that you're in. Employment is one, and some people take that for granted.
Yeah.
Academia is one where you take for granted some of the comments that are thrown at you, especially when you're studying
Absolutely.
masters and PhD. Sometimes it can be very toxic. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to speak to those people and say, you know what, you're not losing your mind. Go seek help. Therapy is good, and at some point you need to go back to the basics.
100%. 100%. Thanks so much. Beautiful intervention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.
Bye.
You see, always what happens with these conversations, I'm so used to them as a facilitator, is that just when you want to end, so many people want to talk to you. Why don't you type in the comment section? Because I think I'm still getting used to these technologies. When I go to the bit where it says requests, sometimes people's names are there, but they didn't actually request, or maybe they did so by accident. So Michaela, I can see. Delora, I can see. Nivuo, I can see. Just type in the comment section if you want to come live and have a conversation with me. I'll take one more person, and then I'll wrap it with that person. But just type your name there, and then I will make sure that you come on. Yeah, I mean, I really mean it. Existence is hard. That for me is the starting premise for recognizing that getting help is perfectly acceptable. If you live a full life, it is going to take its toll on you. The only way you can not have physical and mental challenges over the course of an entire life is if you are not living a full conscious life where you are trying your best to live a life with purpose. But if you wake up with goals you've set yourself, defining your place in the world, and you want to chip away at your goals and achieve them, you're going to encounter obstacles, and not just externalities, but also obstacles inside of you. You're going to have imposter syndrome, where you feel you don't belong, you shouldn't be in a PhD program, you don't belong in a particular workplace. You will think that it's by luck that you were appointed, and you slipped through with a good interview, but you're going to be busted. And very quickly, these things can lead to some challenges. And we are going to have that conversation, not tonight, but I promise you we will have a full conversation about mental health. And I'm going to keep it practical and give you advice based on my experience as a patient. And I'll bring in one or two other people that have done so as well. Okay, so one or two of my faves want to come on. I'll let you come on. I think Delora is one of them. And we'll see whether I can get that right. Lebo, of course you're going to be you're going to come on. Just prompt me to let you in, and I'll let you in. I'll search for you. Let's see.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Glad that you let me in.
I was trying earlier. I don't know what happened there. And we're also going to bring in Lebo Khan, who's my other fave that I haven't spoken to since I was on radio. But how are you?
No, I'm very good. There's been a lot of conversations going back and forth. I'm in the dark because I have to hide myself, but I have a lot of things to impart with this.
Okay, so it's me, you, and Lebo Khan as well. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how's it?
I'm good. I'm living vicariously through your birthday year on Facebook.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you're in the dark, but we're listening.
Yes. So for me, we were discussing the whole AKA issue, and well, I don't know how we landed up, but basically, it's a bit of a touchy situation because it looks like a little bit of domestic violence, and for my side, it's always, even before when she died, and my best friend and I would sit together and we'd both say, I don't know why Twitter's so quiet, but I guess like people have got money to keep things quiet. But it was like something that was not right here. But over and above that, it's that like you're looking at a situation that, okay, so AKA went and, you know, like, I mean, she fell butt naked in the middle of the morning, etc., etc. So then we're like, okay, she's got like her own problems and vice versa. And so no one can judge. I really thought that we could all judge. But I think like here is like the main thing of a narcissist and an empath. And your empath will always try to make things work. And the narcissist will continuously make things look like they're okay. And then the empath, at some point, I mean, everyone has their own end. Like at some point, kuba enough, you know, like where you've just had your enough. And so I don't know what happened. But the videos that were shown today, the pictures that were shown today, life I've lived myself, literally was a person saying, I just can't anymore. And yes, it happens when you are drunk or maybe on a lot of drugs, but it just happens where I can't. Because if the story was good, if they both, I don't know if they took drugs, and if they did take the drugs, generally it would have been a good morning. But at that time, she was in her head on some, you know what, actually, I can't, I'm going. And then now it's like, no, she's had like the depression stage for a long time. And Eusebius, also, I want to question you later or in your own thoughts. Uguti, when that death happened, I was very concerned, Uguti, how? But we are struggling with GBV. Woman falls 10 floors down. No one says anything. So no one says anything, but then I was like, okay, I guess PR agencies are working their asses off and whatever. But then now it's coming out, and I'm like, well, duh. Like, why would we not have thought of that story? And then yes, she might have been suicidal. She might have been a lot of things, but a lot of things are not just driven by Eusebius making me coffee. If Eusebius makes me coffee and then he tells me just how bad I am, and I don't know what Eusebius has to tell me, and then I lose my shit, But
Yeah.
there's something else, and I think it's like a knock with
Mm.
an empath who probably could have possibly been a borderline personality disorder.
I hear
Then
you. I hear
we
you. And I
put
think
them
that's
all
fair. Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
then now it's like a big party. But it's like, guys, this thing,
Yeah.
I saw it from the day where she dropped and she was naked 10 floors down. That could not have been a suicide attempt.
No,
So
I
I
hear you.
think,
Level, what do you think? What comes up for you?
Hi.
hello.
How's it? Yeah. Go ahead, Level.
Yeah, so like you said earlier on, I personally don't know AKA or ANELE, but what I like is to see the state of the nation from these high-profile incidents. And so even I did not look at the images today because they are very triggering for somebody who has worked in the GB field. But what worried me about the psyche of our society and how misogyny has infiltrated our entire society is the images that I saw after she died and with what the majority of South Africans called love. I saw a man who was showing this woman up as a trophy. I saw a woman who was being objectified. She was in every video. She was in every, she was, and there is something about that displayed love that I watched our society called love, where, even some comments where people were saying the night before or hours earlier, they were at a yep, and I saw them dancing, and I think he was even slapping her bum, and I was like, how can the objectification of another in a relationship that is deemed to be of equals be seen as love? I looked at it, and I remember saying to my kids, I'm saying, for me, music and performing is his job. It's not her job. So the fact that at 3 a.m. they are at a club and he's busy displaying her, flaunting her. Look at the appendage that I have. Look at this object that I have. It is a fresh object. It is 22 years old. And I hear people saying, oh, people could love each other. And after, a few hours they are sitting on the one is dead, is lying in the street. Says to me, we are sitting here today almost in shock, but in fact, the way that we all desire to have a 22-year-old next to us who's making us look good, who can be with us in a club at 3 a.m. while we are slapping their bum to show that we have arrived. It's so normalized in society that both men and women in the social media just after she had died saw it as a display of love. And I was just like, we have so much work to do to even explain what is violence. I remember saying to my kids, why is she up at 3 a.m.? That's not her job. A partner, and at that time, that's when the narrative of a mental illness was there and depression. If I had a partner who wants me to accompany them or join them while they were working somewhere, and I want them to display love, firstly, they won't have me in a nightclub at 3 a.m. if they know that I've got a mental health illness. They will make sure that I am at home. They will go and work because their place of work. I've never seen you, Eusebius, drag your partner into the radio station and say, let me show you how much we love each other. I'm going to do this show with my love. I've had many boyfriends. I don't drag them like that. And I'm using this nonsensical explanation to be saying every time she was an appendage to this man who seemed to be so desperate to show that I've landed a young, pretty thing. You know, we applauded that as love. And so how much has our own consumerism and our own normalization of misogyny, particularly when it's our faves, make us blind until you find pictures that are as worrying and as graphic as the ones that are this week. And it's not only him, you know. I mean, right now we are looking at the black coffee story, and again, there is the ex-wife who is a gold digger. He's our fave. And we are not even able to see his toxic masculinity because he's our fave. And I think, for me, the aspiration of our society, it looks like we are desperate to see black excellence, and we want to find it wherever it is. Any glimpse of a black person that has made it, no matter how toxic they are, we want to see it. We are desperate to see black love, even in its most toxic manner. And I think outside of these characters, we need to ask ourselves as a society about how in our own behavior we are elevating and almost saying to our faves, you are untouchable, you are unaccountable to anybody. I mean, the images with him sitting at the funeral in front, it was like, oh, but you know, my man, you are so broken. You know, like, I'm sorry, you know, I just looked at them and I'm like just saying, I don't know where I landed here, but I'm not too sure if I am in the same people with. There is something about us as a society where these conversations must move from being about the lives of others, but about what is success, what is black excellence, what is black love. And bell hooks write a lot about, you know, about that, you know, and I think part of these conversations need to really, and I think the age of social media, while it makes me find you and we can, you know, connect, there is something that has happened about what we glorify, what we see as important, that we ought to interrogate as a society. And in a lot of ways, you are saying we are all AKA. I want to say we all are promoting a lot of misogyny as men and women. And we need to look at the cultures that we are promoting. And just before we press that like, just before we press, oh, my man, you know, yeah, and daughter, you know, oh, man, you loved her. And I'm like, where was the love? Is displaying her everywhere you go, in every picture. Is this the love that we are talking about? Okay, there's something going on here about, you know, a conversation about black love.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love you to bits. I miss our black love on radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, all of you are saying you love what Lebo is saying. I'm not going to cancel this one. I'm going to put it on Instagram TV, and then I'll tweet the link tomorrow. So you can retweet it, everyone, on Twitter, so that people on Twitter who want to can come back to this. It will live on my Instagram account. So the conversation is going to be archived because it is that important. And do follow Lebo. Lebo is one of my favorite South Africans who've done the most amazing work in her career. I'm loath to ask a question because I'm full with everything you've said. And the black love is another theme that I'm going to put in my head as a conversation for us to have on Twitter, on Instagram in the next couple of weeks. But can I ask one small Nyana question, just for completion's sake? And I suppose this is the radio host in me, not Eusebius himself, as it were, because I agree with everything you say. But a small devil's advocate question that hopefully can allow us to just tie a bow around what you are saying. How do we determine, though, Lebo, whether or not someone like a 22-year-old has agency when they find themselves at the club at 3 o'clock in the morning. What would you say to someone who says, like everyone is responding to you and agreeing with the letter and the spirit of what you are saying? But I can imagine someone saying, okay, what you're saying is true. There's something, someone said on the thread, you are right. There was something performative about the relationship, literally and figuratively. And I think that captures it beautifully as well. But then, should we always be suspicious of people in public careers like musicians, club DJs, being in relationships? What about the agency of their partners? I mean, I can be 22, 23 and be fully aware of what I'm doing if I'm at the club with DJ Eusebius. Sometimes I might even have more power than him because I can blackmail him knowing that if I tell him I'm going to tell Lebo about our affair, that's going to put pressure on him and I can get money for me and my girls, whatever the case might be. I mean, I'm making up the example, but they're not unreal. So the way power is dispersed in relationships has always fascinated me, because this is about power as well in part, right? And if you have more power, you can have power because you're confident in your personality. In gay relationships, you can have power if you're out and you're dating someone who's not out, because you can threaten to out them and that gives you power. If you have money, you have power. If you're in a political position, business position, you have power. So power comes in many forms and it's all about power. But the thing about power that's always fascinated me, Levo, is that although there's dominant forms of power, and we must always talk about the majority of cases and not render the exceptional ones as if they are majority. But for arguments, not for argument's sake, for completion's sake, what is your view about particular instances where the dominant narrative about power may not be there? You could have a Ben 10 that you date who is not a victim just because you happen to be 50 with money and confidence and networks and people that you know. That person can rep you around knowing exactly what to SMS you to make you uncomfortable while you're in the middle of a workshop getting that SMS.
So I think you are correct. I think you are correct that, and we have had conversations with young women who have said, I know what my body can do for me. So don't only express me as a victim, who's got this guy who, yes, may put me at risk of even contracting HIV, but I've got agency. I go there fully knowing what I want. And I'm using that as an analogy because you are correct. But I guess for me, much more importantly is that then let's call it what it is. This idea that it was the love that we aspire for, where there is an intersectionality of dysfunction, mental health, and class materialism. So we've not even spoken about the role of capital in all of this. We've not spoken about the monies that almost keep, and I'm not excusing in any way, men like AKA in that dominant masculinity. We are not speaking that alcohol beverages in South Africa have taken almost every so-called successful black man who supports a particular brand. We've not talked about how that even disincentivize the so-called black men to seek help, because you dare be associated with Johnny Walker or whatever. I think he's with a vodka or whatever drink and say, oh, I've got a shrink. You can't be associated with that. So we've also, so for me, the radical black love I'm talking about is the radical black love that is a lot more even about how do we love each other enough that we can call each other out? How do we love each other enough that we can call capital and crass materialism? I mean, you watch some of the things, you watch the women who are endorsing alcoholic brands. It's like industry has said, we've finished all the men. Now let's go to the women and take. So success must be associated with his masculinity. His masculinity is a commodity to industry, because you must be the bad boy. You must have the edge. You must be AKA. You must be. You must. So his life is performative, and then everything else, and you can't come and flip the script when you get into his life. And it is that agency that you are talking about, you know, and we all have ego. You know, I personally love handsome men. So, you know, you want to be seen with, you know what I mean? And so the performative issue is also, so for me, when I talk about Black love, I'm talking about radical Black love, you know, which is also about community. I want a Black love that frowns upon a 35-year-old busy tapping the behind of a 22-year-old and calling it love. I want the kind of conversation amongst Black men, intergenerational conversations that talk about radical Black love and talk about Black love without money. You know, because the other problem that we have is the fact that men with money behave in a particular way because we've put patriarchy, capitalism, and years of colonization where our love intersects all of these issues, where when even the men are not working, women like us, we must always tame ourselves, because the minute you are the breadwinner and the minute you have no problem providing for yourself, men and women question your sanity, because masculinity cannot go with you are not making money or you are not seen to be making money. And brands understand that. So AKA himself must perform to that standard, because, you know, how is he gonna compete with the other one who's filling up the dome? You know, so for me, it's the same way as it's yours bigger than mine,
Absolutely.
kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And therefore, you must have the appendage. So everybody is performative, everybody has agency, but we need to then agree that it is toxic agency that we are talking
I
about.
agree, Level. And you know what's sad about it as well is that not only is there the performative element that masks these intersections of unhealthy social and economic structures and histories that come together,
Yes.
but also at the individual level, beneath the performative element, I promise you, and you know this because you know us, you are part of these networks and you work with people that experience it, and you are professional in this space. Secretly, and it's not to take away moral blameworthiness, but secretly you actually have a whole bunch of vulnerable souls.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that performative element is not even authentic.
No, it's not.
The man that is bashing down that door is both a problem but also pathetic. And when I say pathetic, I don't mean it in a casual linguistic way, but literally psychologically pathetic. There is a danger to himself, but he's also quite frankly vulnerable.
Yeah. There is an emptiness of who am I without the performance that gets displayed by somebody who, if you were to strip them of their lyrics and everything else that society says is great about them, and hence I brought in the problem then that you get when lack of critical Black love, critical Black consciousness, and lack of interrogating the role of capital has done to Black men. And that is why men will say in their own thing, if I can't provide, I don't feel like a man.
Absolutely.
Because in fact, there's little AKAs. Everybody who said, oh, if only I had the money to have such an attractive 22-year-old on my hand. You know, so all of those factors intersect to create this ideal. I mean, I just looked at all the images that kept there, and I was just like, first and foremost, AKA did not die. ANELE died. In all the stuff that I'm consuming, it's about him. And we are consuming them. You know, I think there were 2 lines that she was a chef.
Oh my God, you know, Never, what you're saying is so true. I want to use your own language and
dead. This guy is dead. What is and every image, and I went through, you know, narrative and image for me tell me so much. I went through and I'm like, Haibo. So really and truly, this is what's going to happen. It was the same with Oscar Pistorius. You know, it was Harry Nell. You know, it's a pity it's with AfriForum now. When on that day, with the permission of the family, he showed the pictures of her head with the bullet wounds. Who said, and it was very poignant when he said, This case is about this woman. And I'm saying the people who are consuming Oscar are doing the same with AKA. I mean, go and look at the images on social media about what images came. We knew one line. That is why for me it was about the objectification. We knew one line of her. She was 22. She was a
you're right. And your framing.
And I'm like, he not dead. He not
Your
dead.
framing
He's
is spot
fine.
on. Absolutely. And I know this is a chilling thing to add to what you were saying, drawing on your own framing. Both Riva and Anele are treated as appendages to their famous male partners, even as corpses.
Even as corpses. Even as corpses. And it was like, oh, what a beautiful woman. Oh, she was so beautiful. Oh, AKA, you've lost. Oh, my brother. Oh, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is, am I gonna die one day and people want to find some man to say, oh my brother, talk about me. All I know is that she was 22 and she loved cooking. So even in this, we don't understand her complexity.
Yeah.
We don't understand her complexity. Oh, and she was suicidal, by the way.
Yep.
So we don't understand her complexity as a human being. Much.
And then there's the way the life carries on for the man. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, and I didn't process it because I didn't want to go into a judgment space, but I think you've given me psychic permission to go there. So now there's an inquest. It looks like it. There are 3 police statements reportedly that you've been asked to give, but during that week, you are performing and you are carrying on. I would be shit scared of the process. I would either be consumed emotionally because the person that was meant to be on paper, my partner for the rest of my life, is no longer around. And I certainly am not sure whether I would be able to go to work for a week, during a week when the police are questioning me 3 times about my dead partner. And yet the performative mode is just carrying on.
Yeah.
And I know people have different ways of coping, but if I lost my partner under those circumstances, I would take 2 weeks off radio, minimum.
Yeah, and so we ought to ask ourselves around what are we consuming, and how much how much are we addicted to consuming toxic masculinity? Because toxic masculinity is not as simple as what men display. It's the intersection between patriarchy, crass materialism, and capitalism, and devoid of what I intentionally called radical Black love. And I think the biggest disservice that we have done in this country is that we have not really engaged at what that means. I mean, we are victims to capital. We are victims to capital.
I totally agree.
And we don't even, amongst all of the stars, sometimes it was even, politicians have questioned the role of capital in entrenching toxic masculinity. Because what must these men do? They must perform. Whether they've got erectile dysfunction, whether they've got mental health issues, whatever they've got, and they must perform in a heterosexual, homophobic manner. They must, because capital pays that kind of male. I've arrived.
Absolutely. Lebo, I've missed your brilliance, and people say I must invite you onto my podcast that I've started. We will do that. I love Lebo as much as she loves me. So let's do this.
Absolutely.
By the way, anyone who hasn't looked at the podcast, you can find it on all the platforms. In the ring with Eusebius McKaiser, right? You can find it there. So why don't you and I agree? We'll see who else is cool that we can bring on. And let's actually do, I think I'm going to ask Kopana Ratele. I just love that man.
That would be great.
Yeah, because I think we need to have a full podcast where it's you, me, and we'll decide who else.
And we'll focus on radical black love.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And I now live in both cities. I've decided I can't be in Cape Town for a full year. It's going to kill me.
No, you can't.
The
That is
topic
the
for another day.
antithesis.
Let's
It is
not
the
gossip
antithesis of,
about my
yeah. I
neighbors.
mean, a full year in Cape Town is the antithesis of both self-love and radical black love.
Absolutely.
Cheers, my darling. We'll chat soon. I'll
It's been
connect with
great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Eusebius.
Cheers. Yeah, that's Lebogang Ramafoko. Please go and find her and follow her on all social media. She does amazing work. And check out my podcast, In the Ring with Eusebius McKaiser. The next one is going to drop in a couple of days from now, but I've already done about 4 or 5. And there have been some amazing, amazing conversations we started on the podcast, In the Ring with Eusebius McKaiser. I want to know what you want me to cover on Instagram, what you want me to cover on my podcast. So just DM me. Okay, just send me a DM and tell me which guests you want me to engage, how you'd like me to make the podcast, any style or technique, feedback or preferences that you have, and what topics you think are under the radar that you'd like me to cover as well. I'm going to have Lebo on, and we're going to talk about radical black love, and I'll put that in a future edition of the podcast. This little conversation, I think, is useful, so I'm going to archive it. And then if you want to direct any friends to it, it's going to be living here on my Instagram TV part of the Instagram account. I think it's past midnight. We all better go and sleep. Cheers, everyone.